How's it going, Starseekers? My name's Luke and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at Smelter on the Nintendo Switch. Smelter is an interesting title featuring hybrid gameplay which combines action platforming with top-down strategy, similar to a game called ActRaiser which released on the Super Nintendo back in the 90s. In Smelter, you play as a woman called Eve, and after fusing with a powerful entity known as Smelter, you have to assist him with taking back his lands which have been overrun by enemy forces. In return, he lends you his power, and helps you infiltrate dangerous facilities, absorbing the powers that lay dormant within them, as you search for the whereabouts of your partner Adam. Now, ActRaiser received praise for its innovative game design when it released over 30 years ago, but how does Smelter handle this mishmash of genres, and is it worth your hard-earned cash? In this review, I aim to answer those questions, so pop the kettle on, grab yourself a brew, and let's get started. So Smelter recently released on the Nintendo Switch, where it's priced at £15.9p on the UK eShop, $19.99 on the US eShop, and it's also available on PlayStation, Xbox and Steam. Now, Smelter's story puts a bit of a different spin on the old biblical Adam and Eve story, and the game's intro shows the two of them chilling in the Garden of Eden, when Adam decides to munch down on a sacred apple. This gets the powers that be all riled up who nukes the world, and then we cut to Eve falling through the void into another, much darker world, with Adam nowhere to be seen. Now, after a while of wandering, Eve discovers Smelter, a being which fuses to her body in the form of a suit of armour which grants Eve powerful abilities, and Smelter promises to help Eve find Adam so they can both go back to paradise. In return, you must help him reclaim his lands and rebuild his empire, which has been invaded and overtaken by enemies during his years of slumber. The focus of the game is split between rebuilding the empire by the way of the top-down strategy gameplay and expanding your reach via action platforming segments while searching for Adam. Overall, I thought the story was pretty decent. We get a good cast of characters, each with their own personalities, there's a fun bit of humour in the dialogue, and there's some nice animated cutscenes delivered at key points in the story. Now, as I've mentioned, gameplay is split between two very different genres, and this might be the first sticking point for people looking to buy the game, because like it or not, you're gonna have to play both elements in order to progress through the game. Taking a look at the strategy gameplay first, as this is required in order to actually get to the platforming sections, you basically fly around the battlefield, creating buildings, expanding your empire, and commanding Smelter's army of Zerms to defend the land against the opposing forces whilst capturing key points of interest. Now, in order to actually expand your kingdom, you have to earn resources from within platforming levels, as well as deploying harvesters at fissures on the world map to gather something called helium, which is also used to repair damaged structures. The building of structures simply involves you expanding your land by creating a road, and then you get to select from one of 4 buildings. The first 2 of these are homes to house the Zerms, increasing the total number of Zerms available for deployment, and apple supplies to feed your hungry Zerms, with each building supplying 5 apples. Each Zerm requires both a home and 1 apple, and if either of these are in a deficit, then your population of Zerms will be reduced. Now, the second 2 buildings are the barracks and outposts, and these are your 2 defensive buildings which you deploy the Zerms to. Each holds up to 3 Zerms, with barracks providing ground units, whilst outposts provide ranged units who can also shoot down flying enemies, and in essence, the strategy side of the game is basically a glorified tower defense game, though it does have some interesting elements which feed into the rest of the game. Personally, I didn't really find this strategy element that enjoyable. As you work through the story, you'll be expanding into the adjoining land masses, invading lands and pushing back opposing enemy forces, and your key goal upon entering new areas is to build defences as fast as you can, as each area has a main building which causes waves of enemies to spawn. I personally found that when it came to pushing into new areas, it could be quite a difficult drawn out process, and I especially had issues when trying to break into the Uramagu domain, as the enemies there were pretty relentless and it took me a while to gain a foothold in the region. Now, once you've actually got established in a new region, it's then time to gain access to the main building there. This usually involves breaking some kind of barrier by capturing and holding towers or turrets for a set period of time, after which they'll then fire on the barrier removing it, and you can then infiltrate the structure, which leads us on to the second portion of the game, the action platforming. Now if you've ever played something like Mega Man, Ninja Gaiden or any of the classic action platformers from the 80s and 90s, then Smelter follows a similar format minus the various pickups that these games usually feature. In Smelter, your main objectives within these levels is usually to make it to the end of them to obtain something called Domus Stones, and these allow you to expand Smelter's kingdom, granting you the ability to destroy obstructions barring your way, and the rock formations within areas that the enemies spawn from. Now within the first dungeon of each domain you'll also encounter shrines which empower your armour with one of 3 elements, these being fire, lightning and what I believe is water, and each of these grants you a new set of abilities, but you're only able to use the abilities whilst the appropriate armour is active. You're able to switch between armours on the fly by hitting the ZL and ZR buttons, and I thought this was a pretty neat concept, as dungeons require you to switch between armours in order to access certain areas of them, and the game also has a kind of elemental weakness mechanic, where each element is weak against another, allowing you to deal more damage to enemies when wearing the correct armour. Smelter also grants you a special attack which deals massive damage to enemies, which can be activated after filling a bar with energy obtained from defeated enemies, though I personally didn't really find much use for this outside of boss battles. Now overall when it comes to platforming sections, I actually found Eve's movement mechanics to be pretty frustrating. Firstly, unlike most platformers I've played, her jumps feel very heavy and I sometimes struggle just getting up small platforms. She also has a wall climbing mechanic similar to Ninja Gaiden, but again she barely seems to move when you just tap the jump button, and she's very clingy, instantly sticking to every surface you touch, which I did find caused issues when trying to descend through areas quickly. My final criticism is with the game's dodge mechanics. Each set of armour has its own evasion manoeuvre executed with the B button, but the iframes these provide are very limited, making timings for dodges very strict, and dodging through the hazards in areas like this were just an absolute joke, especially with them moving so fast and the added challenge of treadmills to contend with. The game itself is actually pretty challenging, and I felt this lack of fluidity had a detrimental effect on the game's combat, with Eve's movement really testing my patience and getting the rage juices flowing on more than one occasion. Now turning our attention to level design, each level in the game has its own unique visuals, all of which feature some very nice pixel art. I found the layouts of levels were all pretty well done, though again some of the more challenging platforming sections can get a bit frustrating, and there was some clever use of Smelter's arm grab ability, which not only allows you to finish off the occasional enemy to regain some lost health, it's also used to interact with certain level features, which added some interesting gameplay mechanics and additional variety to levels. Now when it comes to the enemies you face within levels, both their visuals and attacks are also uniquely designed to match each of the game's domains. Again, the sprite work on show here is very good, with monsters well animated, and there's plenty of variety to the environmental hazards you have to navigate through in levels. Now I've already mentioned the Domus stones and materials you need to gather in levels in order to build structures and expand Smelter's kingdom, but in addition to these, there are also several hidden collectibles for you to find in levels. You have things called apple cores, which can be used to upgrade Smelter's heart, the main building at the centre of his kingdom, to boost the attack, health and defence stats of your troops and buildings. You also have blueprint fragments hidden away behind fake walls, though I didn't discover the use of these. And finally, most important of all, are the trial rooms, which are small side areas containing challenges for you to complete. Now these include things like making your way through an area without taking a hit from enemies or hazards, avoiding being spotted by enemies or killing all of the enemies in an area, and completing these trials rewards you with coins, which are then spent on the world map to activate shrines unlocking new abilities. If I'm being honest, while the first few trials aren't too tough, I actually found most of them to be way too difficult for my liking, and without obtaining the coins from these trials, most of your skills will remain locked, which I personally felt was a bit of a bad design decision. Now in all, I thought Smelter was a pretty decent game. I felt that its two distinct gameplay elements complemented each other in terms of storyline progression, but I also thought that the strategy elements were pretty shallow in terms of gameplay, and I really just found myself wanting to get through them as fast as possible and onto the platforming sections. When it comes to the platforming sections, I enjoyed the variety that they offered, but as I said before, I did find them pretty difficult, and with Eve's frustrating movement mechanics and the way additional skills were unlocked, I didn't find it as enjoyable as I thought I would. If like me you're more of a casual gamer, you might find Smelter a little too challenging, but even if you're a pro platform gamer, the strategy elements still make up a decent portion of the game, so you're gonna have to learn to love both sides of the game if you're gonna get the most enjoyment out of it. Now on the visual and audio side of things, graphically I thought the pixel art was fantastic, and I really like the general visual aesthetics of the game. As I've already mentioned, there's some great sprite work throughout the game, and the distinct visual differences between each of the enemy domains gives them their own unique atmosphere and ambience. When it comes to audio, the game's sound effects are all pretty nice with that early 90s feel to them, and the soundtrack was also very enjoyable with some upbeat high tempo tunes to play along to. So overall, Smelter is a decent game. It offers a reasonable amount of content with around 10 hours of gameplay, but I personally think it should have just stuck to one genre, that being an action platformer, as I think players are going to much prefer playing that side of the game than the strategy side. When it comes to my own personal rating of the game, I'm going to be giving Smelter 3 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for a challenging platformer game with some interesting gameplay mechanics and don't mind playing a bit of tower defense on the side, then Smelter might be worth considering. And so that about wraps up this review of Smelter on the Nintendo Switch. Don't forget to hit that like button if it helped you out, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below, and consider subscribing to the channel as I publish detailed and honest reviews like this every few days. For now though, I want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.